All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Welcome and good evening, everyone, to the Louds College of Engineering Diversity and Inclusion Series celebrating Black History Month during National Engineers Week. My name is Rebecca Wass, and I'm the Communications Specialist in the Louds College of Engineering at Fresno State. Today's topics will address the contributions of African Americans in STEM, and well as the importance of students of color to pursue degrees in the fields of STEM. Our presenters include Dr. Carrie McBee and Jalen Harris. After working in industry for many years, Dr. McBee now serves as Assistant Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Fresno State, and he completed his PhD in Electrical Engineering from the Colorado School of Mines and his Master of Science degree in electric power engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I'm sorry, Dr. McBee, if I butchered that a little bit. During his career, Dr. McBee has focused on smart grid implementation, power quality, and forensics. As a researcher, his interests include smart grid concepts, implementation, and planning, optimization, and application of power systems, smart meter machine learning, power quality, and forensic engineering. So welcome, Dr. McBee. We're glad to have you. And we also have Jalen Harris, who is originally from Fresno. Jalen earned his BS in mechanical engineering and a BA in mathematics at Fresno State, and a Master of Science degree in mechanical engineering in 2020. Upon completion of his bachelor's degree, he received the Lyles College of Engineering graduate sponsorship, which covers the cost of tuition to continue his graduate studies at the university. Mr. Harris's undergraduate research in materials science and mathematical computation fueled his interest to pursue a career as a materials science researcher. Upon graduation, he had 4 peer-reviewed publications, my apologies, and Mr. Harris served as an officer in the National Society of Black Engineers Club. He also worked as a mathematics outreach fellow, traveling to local schools to host events that would increase interest in math, and he participated in the Sonia Kowalski Day, on an on-campus event to encourage girls to consider careers in math. Harris is currently attending Cornell University to pursue a PhD in materials science and engineering. First up, I welcome Dr. Carrie McBee. Welcome, Dr. McBee.
Well, thank you for having me. Okay, so let me see if I can bring my slides up here. Oops. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar. And over the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk about some of the African-American pioneers who made contributions in the field of STEM. And not only are we going to talk about their contributions, I think it's important to understand not necessarily their contribution, but the path that they had to follow just to get to that end goal. As many African Americans will attest to in the STEM field, that there are a number of challenges that we have faced to be successful. So let me tell you a little bit more about myself, even though Rebecca gave me an outstanding bio right there. And I want to point this out to you because this kind of leads to my overall discussion. So I'm a registered professional engineer in the field of power engineering, as was mentioned. And being from Texas, yes, I was very interested in what was going on this past week with the deep freeze. Unfortunately, that wasn't necessarily my area of specialty, which is essentially smart grid implementation, forensic engineering, power system optimization. And I've been in the industry for 20 years. Last 5 years, I've been part of the faculty at Fresno State. And during that time, during my time in the industry, I've accumulated over 20 publications related to power systems. Now, the reason I bring all this up, even though it was a great bio, at the beginning. And even though, unlike many academics, I'm not one to just sit there and jump on my soapbox and talk about my accolades. I'm bringing this up for a reason, because if you look at my resume, you can easily say that yes, he was meant to be an engineer. And in fact, I am what's considered an engineer's engineer. In fact, one of my nicknames is last name is McBee. One of my nicknames is McNerd, given to me by other engineers. So if other engineers think you're a nerd, just imagine the type of nerdness you exude constantly. Um, but here's the catch: I almost didn't become an engineer, and much of that was because growing up, I didn't see it as a path for me. And then eventually in 1995, mid 20s, hadn't completed any college credits at the time. Not that I hadn't tried, I had tried. I decided to move to Colorado and give it a shot. And this is when I met Julius Whittier. He was a friend of my stepfather's. And as you can see, Julius was the first African American to letter at the University of Texas on the football team. Now, those of you from Texas know that in Texas, it's all about religion, family, and football. So to think that someone was the first African American to be on the University of Texas football team is a huge accomplishment. But for me, it had more of an impact. Even though I was an athlete, I enjoyed playing football, this was not the impact that Julius had to me. Because Julius was essentially the first Black man that I had ever met that had a college degree. It was the first time that I met someone, even though I was in my mid 20s, it was the first time that I met someone who looked like me, who actually gave me an idea that I could follow my own path. I could do something that wasn't typical to African Americans. And not only did Julius have a bachelor's degree, but well, essentially after having dinner with the former president, Lyndon B. Johnson, as I said, Texas, football in Texas is huge. As when he was having dinner with a number of the football players, he convinced Julius to continue his education and get a degree from the LBJ School of Public Affairs. And then that led him to actually get a law degree. So the first African American I met with a degree not only had a degree, but he had a law degree. Then he was an attorney for 30 years. So, and recently, Julia was awarded with a statue at the University of Texas as being the first African American letterman. But when I look at the impact that he had on me and others who knew him, uh, it was that he had the courage to follow his own path. He didn't listen to naysayers. He didn't listen to what society said that he should do or what friends should say he should do. He made his own way. And I looked at that as far as engineering, because engineering for an African American is a very challenging path. If we look at the field itself, the population of the US is 12.1% African American, 27% if you factor in Hispanics. But yet only 5% of engineers are Black. In fact, if you look at any women of any race, only 13% are women. So if you are a person of color or a woman, working in the STEM field can be very, very challenging, as we can see from the numbers from the Department of Education. Only 7.6 bachelor degrees go to African Americans and only 4.5% of doctorates. So why is this? Well, the Pew Research Center did a study several years ago, and they queried people in the industry, outside the industry, and 44% believe that much of this lack of representation is due to the low number of mentors. As I mentioned with Julius, even though he's not related to STEM, yet I had trouble finding anyone who looked like me for any type of degree. So it's the lack of mentors, the lack of people that you can look up to and say, yes, this person did it, I can do it as well. It's unlike what many people think, it's not the lack of interest. We can see here the study suggests that 54% of the Blacks who are working in the industry suggest that no, interest is there. In fact, if we had to point to anything, it would probably be the education. 52% say that the lack of representation is due to educational opportunities or the lack of educational opportunities. To be even more specific, in regards to encouraging young African Americans to follow in the STEM. So when we start thinking about the contributions that African Americans have made in the last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 100 years, you have to realize that they had more of a challenge than just learning the material. You know, they had to overcome many times educational obstacles. And if we go back to the beginning, before 1960, most public schools were rudimentary. Then after the Civil War, essentially broke up into two systems, one for white people, one for colored people. And just like many things in the 1860s, they were far from equal. As we look up here, we can see this is a typical schoolhouse. And actually, it doesn't look too bad, nice two-story brick. But unfortunately, this is not the colored school. This is actually in South Carolina. The school where the Blacks would go is actually shown here. But even though we had this type of discrepancy, it still didn't dissuade communities and African-American teachers and parents from still trying to push for the education of their students and children. Along with Freedmen's Bureau, white charities, Black communities were able to educate their young, specifically those who were free, those who were just being born. But even though some of the opportunities were there, it was still a challenge in many locations. In fact, as we look at this quote by Susie King from Savannah, Georgia, where she states that whenever they went to school, they had to wrap their books in paper to prevent the police and white persons from seeing them. You know, and whenever I heard this story, I think of two things. Number one, having to fear for being terrorized for getting an education, number one. But then number two is, even though that type of environment exists, you still have the courage and determination to move forward, to try to better yourself, to still try to get that education. So in most places around the country, still segregated schools struggle. We see here, this is actually a picture from my hometown in the 1930s. In fact, this is my grandmother here. So as we can see that the types of schools that were available to Blacks were very much limited. Although there were still times where we had universities such as Morehouse College, Tuskegee University, Howard University, that provided opportunities for African Americans in regards to getting a higher education. Okay, so there were opportunities, but in a way they were far and few between. In fact, if we look over the last 60 years at the number, and the numbers here would be, this would be Black adults, and this would be Hispanic adults. As we can see, back when I tried to start going to school back in 1995, we can see that for African Americans over 25 years old, only roughly 13% of them had college degrees. So it shouldn't be a shocker to realize that in my mid-20s was the first time that I met another African American male who actually had a degree. So when we look at these challenges, even though they've increased over time, there's still a significant disparity as far as going into the STEM field. So those who want to go into that field still must face the educational opportunities or stereotypes defined by society. In fact, I can remember being told back in the 90s that, you know, African Americans typically don't become engineers. And this wasn't by enemies, this was by friends and family. Okay, so there are many stereotypes that suggest that Blacks do not become or engineers or work in the STEM field. Lack of representation, as I mentioned before, lack of mentors. So when we think about the accomplishments of famous African Americans throughout history, we have to realize, and I'm talking about challenges nowadays. So when we talk about someone from 70 years ago, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, think of the challenges that they had to do just to get an education, just to be able to learn something that they love to do, when in many cases, society was suggesting that they shouldn't be doing that. I always think, when I think of famous African Americans and related to science, especially as a little kid, and we didn't get that much education, which is one of the reasons why I like doing this talk right here, because it opens up the eyes to many people who may not get exposed to this in the standard form of education. But when I think back to being a kid, being in school, and someone mentioned someone Black who made contributions to STEM, the first person that always comes to mind is George Washington Carver. Okay, who has not heard of George Washington Carver? Defined by time as the Black Leonardo, even though I like to think of him as the first George Washington Carver. He was born a slave, which, if you think about the story that I just talked about, I talked about problems of today as far as education. Imagine what it would be like to be a slave and to try to become educated. In fact, one of the stories about George Washington Carver, when he was a baby, he was actually kidnapped. He and his mother were kidnapped. And the owners of the plantation weren't able to get both George and his mother back. So they got George back. So they essentially kind of raised him as his own as much as you can in the 1860s. And then eventually, late teenage years, George decided to go off on his own to try to get an education. And it was the first time he had left home, and he was trying to stay at a place. And the woman who was giving the room asked him what his name was. He said, "Well, I'm just George." Because his whole life, that's all he had been known as. She says, "Well, I need a name. What's your last name?" He's like, "I don't have a name. All I know is that I'm the Carver's George," meaning that he was the George that belonged to the Carver. So when you think about someone who lived in this type of environment where they didn't even identify as having a last name, in fact, identified as belonging to someone else, and then to eventually get educated to where not only you're educated, but you're making contributions such as the 44 bulletins for farmers contained. I always think of peanuts when I think of George Washington Carver. Another great pioneer is Elijah McCoy. 57 patents. At the early ages, you can see the way he got around got around the educational obstacle is he actually moved to Scotland. He actually showed promise at an early age and was able to get an apprenticeship in Scotland. Eventually, that led to him getting a mechanical engineering degree. And essentially, you'll see up there, we have a term, the real McCoy. I mean, who has not heard of the real McCoy? Well, the rumor is, not sure if true, but his invention, he invented a device for lubrication. And you got to remember, this is back in the Industrial Revolution, where essentially machinery was new. And his system was able to lubricate devices better than anything else. In fact, inspectors, whenever they were inspecting equipment, would want to know if the equipment was being lubricated by his system, or in other words, they wanted to know if the system was the real McCoy. So essentially, that is the story related to Elijah McCoy, who most people had probably never even heard of. Then there's Glanville Woods. Glanville Woods, I was really shocked when I learned about Glanville Woods. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a power engineer. And I feel as though Glanville Woods was actually If not the first, he was probably the first prominent Black power engineer, even though it was back in the early or late 1800s. In fact, he was sued several, he was considered the Black Edison, but he was actually sued twice by Edison for so-called patent infringements. Both times he won. In fact, after the second time, Edison actually offered him a job. Some of his inventions that one of the things that he invented was a system that basically allowed you to send telephone calls and telegrams on the same system. He ended up selling that to American Bell Telephone Company, which, as we all know now, is Ma Bell. And some of his other contributor or companies that he sold to were Westinghouse, General Electric. He actually designed one of the ways, if you see electric trains that are moving along the street and there's wires overhead and they're actually pulling current off that line, but it's considered safe. He actually developed the technique for drawing the current specifically once you cross the path, otherwise allowing it to be insulated. Right? As I was saying, he was the first Black power engineer. So I'm sure that we've all heard or seen the movie Hidden Figures, uh, based upon true story, based upon the women of the West Area Division Computing Center, basically the West Computers. And for those of you not familiar, computers was the term utilized to describe people who computed, not necessarily the laptop that sit right in front of you. So Katherine Johnson was very significant to the success of NASA. And essentially, her trajectories and her math calculations were very pivotal in regards to, I believe it was John Glenn's first orbit around the Earth. And when you think about something like that, you have to factor in specifically gravitational pull from the sun, basically from the moon, from the earth, not only to mention the rotation of the earth, not only to mention the mass associated with that, and also from the perspective that a lot of it is from a theoretical analysis perspective. So as those of us who have seen the movie are very, very familiar with her accomplishment. But some things that people don't realize is what she actually had to do just to get to that point. I think they kind of showed it in the movie a little bit, where she was a little girl, actually performing or being in a class with people much, much older than her. Well, she graduated high school at 14, and then she graduated with a college degree in mathematics and French, no less, at the age of 18 from West Virginia University, which was a predominantly Black school. Eventually, she would go to West Virginia University, where she was the very first Black woman to attend the university. So even before she was able to accomplish all these at NASA, she still had to accomplish a number of obstacles or be set apart from everyone else. And then, of course, we also saw within the movie Mary Jackson. She was NASA's first Black engineer, published over 12 publications. One of the interesting things that I find or found about Mary Jackson, in the movie, she stated, I think one of her supervisor asked her if she wanted to be an engineer. And she actually stated that if I was a white man, I would be an engineer right now. And when I first saw that, I took that to believe that she would realize that she had an additional path, that she wouldn't be limited to being a computer. She would have other aspirations. But after doing a little research, what I found out is what she meant was many of the women working in the West Computer Center had advanced degrees. However, to be computers, to work at NASA, many times they still had to prove themselves over and over and to take courses that they had already completed. This was the case with her. This is why she said that if I was a white man, I would already be an engineer, because many of the courses that she was going to have to retake to be an engineer wouldn't have to be done. So Mary Jackson, understanding the obstacles that she had to face, eventually rose to the highest position within NASA. And then in 1979, she took a demotion. She took a demotion because she wanted to take a position where she could help other people of color be successful, understanding what she had to go through, realizing that she was in a position that she could help others. Eventually, she took a demotion, eventually became the federal program manager in the Office of Equal Opportunity, and also the program manager in affirmative action. Walter Lincoln Hawkins, he's probably the most decorated um, engineer that we mention on here. He's actually from my alma mater of RPI. He invented, his specialty was polymers. Essentially, he was able to, he developed things that essentially allowed us to be able to deliver power, or not power lines, but telephone lines in rural areas. He was one of the first ones to think that whenever we use plastic, why can't we reuse it? Why can't we recycle it? In fact, the number of awards that he has would take up this whole page. Very, very successful. And then eventually realizing the same thing as Mary, that he wanted to give back. So eventually he ended up initiating the Bell Laboratory Summer Research Program for minorities and women, which had over 1,200 participants that it helped. He was the first chairman of the Project SEED, or Support of the Educational and Economic Disadvantaged. He served as the chairman of the National Academy of Sciences on minorities in engineering. So as you can see here, that many of these who struggled to be successful, once they got to the point, they realized that they could do things to help others. Then there was Otis Boykin, who actually developed, anyone who has a pacemaker can essentially thank him. He essentially designed the control unit for that, for an artificial cardiac pacemaker. And had over 27 patents due to electronic devices. So we can look at these contributors over the past 60 or 70 years, but we can also look closer to what's going on today, even in the 20th or in the 21st century, where we've had contributions in defense, education, energy, health, manufacturing, and communication. And some of the pioneers who we like to talk about is Willie Hobbs Moore. She was the first woman to get a PhD in physics and published over 30 papers. When you think about how, if you go back to cars, General Motors in the 70s, essentially how big and bulky and the cars from Japan were starting to take over. She was implemental as far as changing the American automobile industry. And not to be outdone, the second woman to actually get a PhD in physics is Shirley Ann Jackson. She's actually the president of one of my alma maters, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She has actually been in this position for over 20 years. She was actually the first African American to be a president of a large university of this stature. Then there's Walter Braithwaite. Okay, and engineers know specifically nowadays that a lot of design work that we do, we rely upon computer aided drafting. Okay, well, Walter led the team at Boeing that essentially created the first sets of computer aided design. Specifically, it was in regards, he did it from two perspectives. He did it as the lead of the design, engineering team that developed the 707, the Boeing 707, the Boeing 727, and the Boeing 737. And then eventually he became the head of engineering. And from there, they developed the 747, 767, and 777. hopefully it wasn't the 747 that just flew over Denver recently. And then eventually he was named the president of Boeing Africa in 2000. Ursula Burns, and she is a true success story. Here's a story from someone who went from an intern of a company to actually the CEO, where she was the CEO of Xerox. So in a 30-year period, she went from intern to CEO. In fact, in 2014, Forbes ranked her as the 22nd most powerful woman in the world. So one of the things I was very excited about when I was putting this together, obviously, I know that I missed some of the contributors. In fact, I have a list which I like to think of as far as the honorable mentions, as far as Neil deGrasse Tyson. We have Mae Jennings, Benjamin Banneker, who invented the first clock. Mae Jemison was the first Black female in space. So there are a number, or specifically James West has over 250 patents related to microphones. And fortunately, the list now is huge. Unfortunately, most of these people are unknown, which is one of the reasons why we're having this talk. Then when we think about the up and comers or on the rise, we can think about Kamika Corbett, who recently led the team for the COVID-19 vaccination. Okay, in fact, there's probably some good things on her. In about 20, 30 years, someone may be talking about her as far as ancient history. And then this leads me to our next guest, Jalen Harris, who actually has been a huge success story for the university and Fresno. Jalen, would you like to take over?
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Jalen. I'm glad everyone could be here tonight. I'm going to be giving a presentation about the importance of diversity in STEM. So I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction about myself, talk about some of the main issues caused due to a lack of diversity in STEM fields, go into a bit more detail about my journey through academia up until this point, so everyone can hopefully get a better idea about who I am, and if there are any students here can maybe take something positive from my experience. And also talk about some of the issues that I've noticed from high school to currently my PhD, being a Black male in a STEM discipline. And lastly, I'll talk about some ways in which these problems may be able to be fixed in the early stages. And then lastly, some questions. Okay, so I was born and raised in Fresno, California. I attended Valley Oak Elementary School and Figman Elementary School, and I attended Granite Ridge Intermediate and Clovis North High School. I've lived in Fresno my entire life until I recently moved out here to Ithaca for my PhD. So I've been here about 6 months. I started attending Fresno State in August 2014, and I graduated from Fresno State in May 2018 with 2 bachelor's degrees, one in mathematics and one in mechanical engineering, and then in May 2020 with a master's in mechanical engineering. Currently, I live in Ithaca, New York, where I attend Cornell University, and I'm pursuing my PhD in material science and engineering, where I expect to graduate around 2025. So now I want to get started talking about some of the main issues with diversity in STEM, particularly underrepresentation. So even though STEM occupations have outpaced almost all other job growth, in America, Black workers still make up only about 9% of all STEM workers, compared to about 11% of the overall workforce. Latinx comprise only 7% of STEM workers and about 16% of the total workforce, which is a proportionally significant drop since 2000. And in specific fields such as math and physics, representation of people of color is even lower than this. Diversity problems can begin very early. So as recently as 2018, a quarter of US high schools with the highest percentage of Black and Latinx students did not offer Algebra 2, which is a prerequisite for many higher level STEM courses, as many of us engineers know, and the key barrier to college graduation for most Americans. And a third of these schools did not even offer chemistry. So Black and Latinx students are often denied access to limited seats in advanced courses, and particularly in schools where they are not the majority. So now I want to discuss the concept of the ivory tower of academia, which is the field that I want to go into, but obviously it's not perfect. First and foremost, I want to say that it's key to point out that disparities facing people of color in academia are not homogenous. My experiences as a Black male may not be the same as somebody who is not, for example, Black woman or someone different. So I'm going to talk about it from my perspective, but hopefully we can draw upon some similarities and some of TSC experience. So Black scientists typically receive the lowest among all ethnic groups reporting university salary, as well as a lower likelihood of academic advancement to tenure track positions. East Asian and Latinx scientists as well suffer from inabilities to advance and receive promotions in academia. And the equitable distribution of academic resources, such as funding, perceived prestige, and research often favors institutions which are historically perceived as elite or prestigious, which normally have fewer people of color, which furthers this cycle of inequality and exclusivity. So a question we should ask ourselves throughout the presentation is, how do we increase equity and opportunity for students of color and scientists? So more issues facing students of color. So 10 of the top 14 fastest growing industries require some kind of STEM training. However, according to a team led by Raj Chetty, a Harvard economist, we are losing innovators and their breakthroughs every day because people who could have had these highly impactful innovations are not being given the opportunities that they deserve. It can also be argued that this lack of diversity can lead to life and death consequences. It's been shown by the Association of American Medical Colleges that Black patients fare better when treated by Black doctors and nurses. However, only 5% of doctors nationwide are Black, and only 2% are Black women. So some questions for thought. Why are there not more high quality, personally relevant and career connected high school STEM courses, especially in schools serving primarily students of color? And then what are the barriers even when these courses exist for Black, brown and Indigenous students? And then as we look to rebuild a better and more resilient America post-pandemic, what are the critical catalysts for change? So now I just want to talk about my experiences thus far going through my education from college all the way currently to my PhD, and just shine some light on my journey and then who I am. And my aim is that my experience can provide some insight to other students going through this process. And even if you are not taking the exact same path that I did, at least take some good snippets of information and positively apply it to your experience. So I started at Fresno State in fall 2020, and I did not really know what I wanted to major in. I think in high school, I was interested in math and science, but also interested in like subjects that would typically fall under the humanities, like history. Like, so when I started at Fresno State, I thought about majoring in things like philosophy, all the way from things to physics and chemistry. I ended up choosing engineering, though. I wanted an engineering discipline because I guess it combined like my love for math and science, but also I was told it would provide good job prospects after graduation. So that's how I ended up choosing engineering and chose civil engineering. However, after my second semester, I switched to mechanical engineering. This is because of how broad the field of mechanical engineering is. There seemed to be a lot of exposure to a lot of different fields within the engineering discipline. For example, things like materials engineering, controls, aerospace, and fluids. And during my sophomore year, I took a materials engineering class with Dr. Banerjee. So I think when pursuing any path in college, it's important to find something that you're passionate about. And for whatever field you're in, I mean, you might like everything in it. That's obviously the best case scenario, and that's awesome. For me, I found that I was really drawn towards materials science and materials engineering due to the mixture of the fundamental physics, such as understanding the underlying quantum mechanical phenomena that can aid in describing the behavior of materials, as well as using things like chemistry to help aid in describing how atoms and molecules can come together within a material. And so at the end of this class, or one of the classes, I think Dr. Banerjee asked if anyone was interested in doing research, and I ended up taking him up on the offer. And this was my first introduction to experimental research, and one of the first steps in helping me figure out what I was trying to do. I ended up joining his lab and doing some work investigating the properties of zinc oxide composite materials for use in energy harvesting devices. It's a cool first project. So I always had a love for mathematics, and after completing all of the required engineering mathematics courses and being super intrigued with everything I saw, I guess I wanted a more fundamental understanding of the underlying math. So I decided to add a major in mathematics at the beginning of my junior year, which was definitely a great step and really helped me figure out what I wanted to do. Engineering, I guess, is also a form of applied math, but usually applied towards the physical sciences. With applied math, I was able to do research in other fields, for example, economics and finance. So with my major in mathematics, I got involved in research in applied mathematics, specifically research in financial math. And I started in the Department of Mathematics at Fresno State with Dr. Steve Chung, where I started conducting volatility estimations of foreign exchange rates. After this, I began attending I attended over a summer a research experience for undergraduates, which is a program where undergraduates from all over the country usually go to a school and work on a research project over the summer. And you get to meet people from all over the country and work in a new department with people you've never worked with before. And I thought that was a really good experience, and it really cemented my interest in doing academic research. So based on my previous experimental research within material science and then the research that I had done in applied math and mathematical finance, I wanted to combine the more applied math aspect and the material science aspect. And then I ended up coming back during my senior year, and then through my master's degree, I worked on a project with Dr. Banerjee and Dr. Sakeem Ahmed, then of Intel. Now he works for SUNY Buffalo State, and we worked on a project with a more computational and simulation focus, which modeled electronic transport within photovoltaic devices. So my research in material science and applied math led to my contribution in 4 peer-reviewed publications that I was able to present. And I was able to present this work at many conferences, including the Joint Mathematics meetings and the Materials Research Society national conferences, and also local conferences around the Fresno area and in California. So all of the research experience that I had done, it led me to determine what career path I wanted to pursue. And in this case, it was academia, and going to pursue a PhD. So in the last year of my master's degree, I began applying to PhD programs in material science and engineering. And I ended up getting into some really great programs and ultimately ended up choosing Cornell University. So this is mostly due to the research available and also the people that I would be able to work with. So now my time at Cornell. So I started my PhD in material science and engineering in fall 2020 at Cornell University up here in upstate New York. I'm co-advised by 2 different advisors. One is Dr. Nicole Benedek, who works in material science, and Dr. Robert Stasio, who works in chemistry. So these are 2 really amazing advisors, and I'm able to span research across 2 pretty similar but also different fields, and get really nice breadth of research. So my research area currently is in computational material science and theoretical chemistry. So I kind of got the best of many worlds in my research. So I am able to continue to do the math that I'm interested in, computation, and also the material science and engineering. So currently, my work involves developing and improving what are called electronic structure methods, which help advance the frontiers of the computational modeling of materials. So that's kind of the more pencil and paper mathematical area of my work. Then I also work developing computational methods to implement these methods in the computer to help compute key materials properties and help understand the underlying phenomena behind the macroscopic materials behavior to aid in the development of new materials. So now after that overview, I want to talk about some of the issues that I faced being a Black scientist or Black engineer from high school all the way up to my PhD. So first, I want to talk about something about the idea of stigma, which is the idea that academic success is perceived as a proximity to whiteness, the idea of being whitewashed or speaking properly. Isolation, so being one of the only Black students in most places I was or have been. Lack of diverse mentorship, I believe as Dr. McBee talked about, and then also having family support systems unfamiliar with the process or ways to navigate success in STEM. And then lastly, I want to talk about the idea of academic capital. So having someone with expertise to guide you through the process, knowing how to do certain things such as writing and framing application essays, fees, and hidden costs of success such as prep books and tutoring that many minorities face. So stigma, I really wanted to talk about something that I've experienced quite a bit. The idea that academic success or correctness is perceived as your proximity to whiteness or being whitewashed or speaking properly. Many minorities experience this in both directions. So coming from communities where English may not be your first language or maybe you have an accent or delivery that isn't what is considered proper, you might be stigmatized for this or admonished for this, and it can be very frustrating. I think I experienced this kind of almost in a reverse way. I would constantly be told certain things like, you're the whitest Black person that I know, or you talk or sound white, or you speak so well. And maybe the people telling me this were well-meaning, but it comes across as like the way that I was talking is surprising because you're assuming that as a Black person, I should sound a certain way. Or it's based on the assumption that race is behind the way that people should act, speak, or carry themselves. Things like this can really contribute to a sense of otherness and lead people to question their identity. And it kind of leads into the next topic that I wanted to talk about, which is the idea of isolation. So during my high school, undergraduate, and graduate studies, I've often been one of the only Black students in the classrooms, especially when taking more advanced science and math classes. And what this does is it creates this this feeling of standing out or having more pressure on you. You feel like you have to set an example for everyone. And I guess going to school isn't already comfortable, but this makes it a bit more frustrating because I feel like you have to go above and beyond to complete assignments on time, to make sure you're doing your best on everything, and ensure that you don't fail, because you have this feeling that if you do fail, you will have let all the other Black students down. And being the only person in your classroom, you feel like other people will just think, oh, maybe Black students aren't cut out for this type of thing. Maybe they just can't do it. And definitely lead to feeling like you don't fit in or feeling like you're not a typical student, and can leave you to not have a very relaxed learning experience. This also leads into the idea of being an imposter, having self-doubt. So even if you're doing okay, this can lead to decreased performance because you feel like you're not doing okay. So this happens definitely for a lot of people, and is something that should definitely be aware of. And then lack of access to academic resources and capital. So I would say this can start in high school. I would say that I've been pretty lucky. Had I not been able to come into Fresno State with so much college credit and advanced placement credit, whether it be from advanced placement or taking a few college classes in high school, I would not have been able to take the risks that I did and really explore what areas that I wanted to be in. I got started relatively quickly taking advanced engineering and math courses, whereas there are many students that are stuck taking introductory math and physics courses or maybe the entirety of their first and second years, and they're unable to see the true nature of their discipline, and it kind of becomes a slog. And then a lack of diverse mentorship and needing more role models to follow. So in general, students are more likely to follow the example of people going through similar experiences themselves or coming from a similar background. This allows you to view your end goal as something that's actually attainable. And it's a lot of pressure on somebody to feel like you're breaking ground in a particular area. And then lastly, I want to talk about constantly having to be your own self-advocate. As a first generation college student, it's extremely difficult to break into STEM disciplines at an undergraduate level, let alone at the graduate level. And even for people that are well informed, it takes a lot of research and expertise to understand what you want to do, why you want to do it, and how to actually get there. So for me, I had to do a lot of research on my own to understand what things were necessary to get to where I wanted to go, and also why did I want to get there? What opportunities were available? So if you have a legacy of people with advanced degrees, PhDs, law degrees in your family who understand how to get to that point, they can make the whole process quite a bit easier. Whereas if you don't, you have to answer quite a bit of questions to even get to a point where you can try and figure out what you're actually even trying to attain and how to get there. So you have questions like, what are the job prospects? What do I need to do to put myself in the position to even apply? So things like doing a PhD, you have only 4 years of college. So you really have to optimize your time to get everything that's necessary to have a competitive application. For example, how do you get started doing research? If you don't feel like you belong somewhere, this usually involves approaching a professor. And as a first or second year college student, you may not feel like you are ready or that you even understand enough to even get started doing something like research. What exams do I need to take to do professional school or do a PhD? You have to take things like the LSAT, the GRE, the DAT, things like that. How do you prepare? What scores do I need on these exams to be competitive? You have this plethora of questions that you really have to answer, and it can become very overwhelming to somebody who doesn't really have a framework to how to understand how to go about it. And also, under constantly having to be your own self-advocate is people are more likely, I would say, minority students are more likely to be unwilling to make waves or stick up for themselves if you feel like you already don't belong somewhere. So people will task you with things like too much work or unreasonable deadlines. And unless you're willing to stick up for yourself, you'll definitely get walked over. However, it's difficult to say anything if you feel intimidated or you feel like you don't belong there, like the program is doing a favor by letting you in. Another thing is ensuring that you're doing what you want to do. For me, in my PhD, it's making sure that I'm working on a project that I find interesting. So if you find that maybe you're not doing something that you're interested in, or you're not working with the person you want to be working with, sometimes you have to make waves and just say, I'm not really feeling this. This isn't what I'm trying to do. How can we rectify this? Or how can I make sure that I'm doing what I want to do and enjoying my work? I also had to do this with things at my undergrad, the things like adding my mathematics major. I feel like if I didn't do that, my experience would be completely different, but I almost wasn't able to do that because it initially got denied the first time. So I had to go back a few times and try and, and advocate for myself. To make sure that I would be able to get that added. And then there's also lots of hidden rules in application writing, hidden costs of success, such as prep books, tutoring, and textbooks. And then this is much easier if you know someone that has been through the process before and can consult people with the know-how to craft a successful application. So what types of schools should I aim for? That was one of the questions that I was asking when I was applying for my PhD. So during the application process, I was constantly second guessing myself about whether I had the credentials to apply to certain prestigious schools. And I felt like that because I didn't come from a select group of elite schools, that they'd throw my application out or laugh at it or something. Probably very irrational, but at the time I had no idea going into it. So, however, once I was accepted, I went on campus visits. It turns out that my credentials were just as competitive, if not more impressive than many of the other students from these schools. And it comes down to just feeling like you belong and having the confidence that you're just as worthy of becoming a successful engineer, scientist, or mathematician. So what can we do to create change? I would say number one, you need to better prepare and support people of color from preschool to college. And then two, recruiting students into STEM and providing scholarships are not enough to foster success, but need to create a new culture at schools, universities, and workplaces to help minority students to succeed. And then lastly, I want to talk about who should be doing diversity work. So Robert Head, the first Black president and president emeritus of Rockford University, has stressed the importance of diversity work being everyone's concern. He says, I find the delegation of anti-racism work to Black faculty in many cases to be an act of minimization. The Black faculty members get all the work with limited influence to change things, while the institution gets to say it's doing something. So I would say in order to make meaningful change, support for diversity must come from top to bottom of university hierarchy in order to avoid taxing already burdened students of color and faculty with so-called invisible labor. Through collaboration, and listening to the voices of those most marginalized and valuing contributions of people of color, we have an opportunity to empower students of color to pursue STEM on an equal footing. So lastly, questions, and I have my contact info here. So anyone wants any advice or guidance or comments or questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jalen. So we do have one question, and feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. Let's see, from Clint Williams. Can you describe your family a bit, Jalen, about your community, your upbringing, a little bit about your parents and what they do, or what led you to your fascination of STEM?
Sure. My father, he works doing in a plant manufacturing pressure vessels. So he kind of does work that's engineering work. So, but neither of my parents did go to college. So I was a first generation college student, but my dad was definitely the person that got me into doing engineering related things. He would always do things like bring computers home. I would take them apart, build computers, and took me out to his job and did things out there. Got to see the manufacturing, and that's kind of what got me interested in doing civil and mechanical engineering. So yeah, my also definitely he tried to get me involved in doing things in math and science, and that was also very important when I was going to school. So that was definitely one of the contributions.
And another question from Clint Williams. With all your education at advanced degrees, what's your ultimate goal or your ultimate dream job?
I started my PhD with the intention of becoming a professor. I would say that's still my goal. Obviously, nothing's as perfect as you think it is in the beginning. So, I also am not opposed to going into industry. If I go into industry, my main goal would be to I want to work on Wall Street, do mathematical finance.
Interesting, mathematical financing. That's very interesting. I would love to know more about that. Does anyone else have any more questions right now for Jalen or Dr. McBee? Dr. McBee is also available. So Jalen, maybe you can talk a little bit about mathematical financing on Wall Street and your ultimate job there, if you don't mind. I'd like to know.
Sure. So I guess the job is what's called being a quant. So normally people like that work at investment banks, and they most of the time it's PhDs in the sciences, typically computational fields, and they work constructing models for a lot of the pricing assets on Wall Street. Well, not just pricing, lots of different things, pricing, risk assessment, things like that. Yeah, so
we do have some questions coming in. Let's see here. Who were some of the people throughout your educational career who really inspired or supported you?
I would say in high school, it was mostly due to my friends in high school. I think in my high school, there were a lot of high achieving students, and I initially was not, I didn't really have aspirations to go to college. And I found a group of friends in high school, and they all had aspirations to be doctors or go get their PhD, go into law school. And that was kind of what got me started saying it's something that's probably attainable. Once I got to Fresno State, there are definitely some professors that helped me a lot. Definitely Dr. Banerjee got me started doing research, really helped me throughout the process. Was my advisor as well, helped me pick classes and do things like that. In the mathematics department, definitely Dr. Carmen Caprao. She really helped me a lot when I was first getting started as a math student. Helped me get involved in other outreach work at Fresno State to help other underrepresented students. And yeah, my advisors at Cornell are also really awesome. It's very good to have people that support you along the way, so that it makes things a lot less stressful.
And Dr. McBee, same question for you. Who were some of the people throughout your educational career who really inspired or supported you?
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, probably at the beginning it was Julius, as far as kind of giving me the inspiration that I could do it. And then once I started on my path, I would probably say it was one professor, a Dr. John Palmer, who was a power specialist. And he seemed to take interest in me as an undergraduate. And in fact, he eventually hired me as a professional engineer as well. He's what actually got me involved in forensic engineering. Because he knew of my experience prior to going to school, and certain projects came up and I was the first person that he thought about. So he and I are very close to this day. But yeah, so he would be one of the main ones as far as shaping my career, as far as working in power, as far as focusing in forensic engineering. In fact, um, one of my projects right now, where we're working on a fire prevention system to prevent utility companies from igniting wildfires. A lot of the ideas were developed from experiences I gained while working with him. So I would probably say him, yeah, John Palmer, Dr. John Palmer, who actually has he's left academia and he started his own forensic engineering firm about 5 or 6 years ago. In fact, so yeah, I'd say he was probably the biggest influence in my professional life.
So Dr. McBee, what's your advice to young students in high school who may be interested in STEM education? And I'll also give that to you, Jalen, especially engineering for the both of you to answer, if you don't mind.
A couple of recommendations. Focusing on STEM, number one, and I would give this advice to any student, which is math. Work on your math. I see that being one of the largest obstacles to all students. From a diversity perspective, I would say that, follow your own dream. Don't necessarily get caught up in thinking that maybe you don't belong. As Jalen was talking about in fact, as he was giving his speech, a lot of times I was shaking my head like, yep, I've experienced that. Yes, I've experienced that. The feeling of not belonging because there's no one there around you who looks like you, thinking that you may be different. And my advice is to walk your own path, to don't get caught up in thinking don't get caught up in thinking that you should be a certain way just because of the color of your skin or where you're from or what other people think. Believe in yourself and believe if that's something that you want to accomplish, then you can follow that. It may be a little different than the common path that many people choose, but if that's your path, then it's the right path.
I'd like to, second the math thing. I think there's definitely a mindset that a lot of people think that they can't do math, and I think I don't know why that mindset gets perpetuated. I think it's something that can come from like bad teaching, especially in the early years. And I think if people have a bad introduction to math or a bad introduction to some scientific subject, I think they should maybe try and give it a second chance, because I know that was definitely one of my introductions. I did not like some of the first 2 math classes I took, and ended up taking different ones, and I had completely different experience. So that's definitely something I would say. From a diversity perspective, I would say, find a discipline. You definitely do your research, take a look at what you're interested in, but you want to find something, like I mentioned in my talk, that you're passionate about in it. I don't think you want to do anything just for the sake of doing it. Like, don't do STEM just to do STEM. I think if you find something that you're passionate about within STEM, I think that's what you should follow. And that's definitely my experience as well. Definitely some classes I took in the beginning, I was like, why am I taking these? I'm not just interested in this at all. But then once I found what I was interested in, I think everything kind of made sense, and it was really easy to move forward.
And Jalen, what do you do in your spare time as a hobby or for fun?
Okay, since COVID started, let's see, I like to run a lot. Been reading, watching movies. I mean, pretty much typical COVID stuff. Watching a lot of sports lately.
How about before COVID?
Before, yeah, definitely a lot more active before COVID. it's weird having your first semester in a new town with COVID, because I feel like everything's dead, but I feel like it's not usually like this. But yeah, I don't know, going out, having fun, playing sports, working out, things like that. Yeah.
And Dr. McBee, how about you?
Same thing. Actually, I'm a professor, so I don't get to do a lot of fun. I spend most of my time doing research and teaching. No, that's a myth. Actually, I have a lot of free time, and I don't think it's changed that much, except for the going out doing things amongst people. But as far as a whole lot of movie watching, a lot of working out, believe it or not.
So I have a question from Kimberly Stillmaker. If either of you have personal experience with imposter syndrome, can you explain how you have dealt with it or overcome those feelings?
Well, I think in my case, I think that yeah, I think I would still say that I suffer somewhat from imposter syndrome as far as believing that maybe I shouldn't be here. Or I would say it really manifests in the thought that to be accepted, I have to not just be average, but I have to be above average. And I think that's probably the biggest impact is realizing that or believing that I just can't be whatever I do if I want to be accepted, which is that's where your imposter syndrome comes in. If I want to be accepted, then I have to perform better than everyone else or better than the average. And I think that for me, that's where it manifests.
So I guess for me, I guess starting a PhD at Cornell, I guess I'm around a lot of students that went to very prestigious undergrad institutions, people places like MIT, Stanford, Berkeley, Princeton. So constantly, I feel like sometimes I'm comparing myself to them, and did I have the same preparation? Am I the same? Do I know as much as these people? Am I as smart as these people? I think I beat that, but I think it is tough. I think really once you talk to people, and then once you're in classes with everyone, I feel like you kind of end up seeing that most people are on the same playing field and everything is all right. At least in my experience, I think I'm doing okay.
So we have one more question from Dr. Brisa Quiroz. Why do we need to include minority voices in engineering?
Oh, I think there's a number of reasons that we've touched upon. Number one is from a perspective of providing mentors, having so students have someone to see someone who looks like themselves. But also, too, I think it's to identify barriers that may be elusive or invisible to someone who's not of color. Because I know there are a number of things that I've experienced in the workplace, which did not necessarily sit with me right. And knowing the people well, I know that they didn't have any ill will intended, but I know what they were doing was not going to be perceived correctly. So it gives me the opportunity to express, say, hey, you realize that what you're doing may not be viewed in a certain way by certain people. So I think that's with not only people of color, but I mean that would go for gender as well. I mean that is trying to be all inclusive, being able to not only to see just one viewpoint, but being able to see others' viewpoints. So you need those voices. You need those diverse voices.
Yes, I agree. I think when you're in environments where you don't have very diverse perspectives, you can end up in a lot of just annoying situations, or just situations that if people had been around or grown up around a diverse population, you just wouldn't have experienced them. So you end up in less situations where you're having to go places and tolerate things. as opposed to just going in and just enjoying yourself and not worrying about that. Because people kind of understand that not everyone is the same, and there's certain things you shouldn't do, and you kind of develop this sensitivity to different people, different cultures, different religions, and it makes your environment a lot more peaceful.
So I have another question. We have, has Dr. McBee felt his color has made it more difficult for him to become a professor and compete?
I would say yes, but only from the perspective, um, well, directly as far as at Fresno State, I would have to say no. But I think and maybe once again, this is part of what I was talking about before in regards to how my imposter syndrome manifests as far as the having to feel like you have to be better. I don't think it's necessarily really impacted any positions that I've gotten. The one thing I can say about academia, I think, is that specifically when it comes to jobs or publications or research, is that that is based upon merit. That is based upon how you do perform. What is your research? And not necessarily the color of your skin. Maybe one reason why I do feel it was a path for me.
From Dr. Ram Nuna, for more serious questions, what are your ideas to increase the number of African American and other minorities to participate and succeed in engineering? Where do you believe this process would start?
I think it has to start definitely pretty early. I think a lot of the issues that I've seen, especially at Fresno State, that I didn't necessarily have to experience because of I was able to take advanced placement classes in high school, and I was able to take some courses for college credit. I started out very advanced in math and science, so I was able to get started actually doing engineering classes in my first or second semester. A lot of people, this isn't the case. I've seen a lot of people get stuck at introductory math courses, introductory physics courses, and maybe never be able to pass them, or have a very difficult time because they're severely unprepared. So that's definitely something that I think it starts back in elementary, junior high school, ensuring that preparation is correct.
Yeah, instilling them the desire to be an engineer, making it an option, let them know that, this is a path that you can walk down, that you can do. Specifically, we tie it right back to providing mentors of some type of role models that they can see. Can give a child of 8 years old, 9 years old aspirations to, hey, you know what, I want to be just like her, or I want to be just like him, or I can be just like him or her. So I think, yeah, you really want to start, if possible, elementary school, most definitely junior high school.
Yeah,
Because
and based off of what Dr. McBee said, I think no one's going to want to pursue something if you don't really understand what it is. And I feel like even when I was getting started in college, I didn't really understand what engineering was, or what the actual career paths were to do in engineering. I had no idea what a PhD was until maybe my first or second year. So I think trying to understand these things is very difficult, especially like if you don't have someone in your family or someone that's close to you that has done it before. So I think it's very important, like Dr. McBee said, to instill in people what the actual perspectives are with these career paths as well.
Any concluding remarks, Jalen and Dr. McBee?
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for
yes,
coming.
yes.
This was so wonderful. Thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us. And again, thank you, Jalen and Dr. McBee, for this really important talk today. So we really
Thank you for having me.